Just because every bank turned him down for a loan, this black man came up with a crazy idea. If he could buy the office building that housed 7 different banks, then those banks would become his tenants. And once that happened, they could never turn him down for a loan again. So he got to work immediately. Every night, he would stand outside the building, just by counting how many office lights were still on. Bernard could accurately estimate the building's real occupancy rate. Then he combined that with other data he gathered on site. He calculated the building's annual rental income and actual profits, and eventually figured out its true market value. After that, he approached a powerful black real estate investor named George and laid out his entire acquisition plan. George was stunned after hearing it. That was one of the most expensive buildings in Los Angeles, and on top of that, the owner was white. In 1950s America, wealthy white people looked down on black people completely. Trying to buy property from them on their own turf felt almost impossible, but Bernard didn't rush to argue. Calmly, he explained why this deal made perfect sense. There were 7 major banks inside that building. Once they owned it, getting loans would become much easier. At the same time, they would gain direct access to financial and real estate trends before anyone else. That alone would give them a huge advantage in business. But more importantly, Bernard discovered something during his investigation. Even though the building sat in a prime location, a large number of offices were still vacant. That meant the owner had limited rental income, while still carrying massive operating costs. At the same time, Bernard also learned that the owner was trying to raise a huge amount of cash for a new development project, and this money-losing building was exactly the burden he desperately wanted to get rid of. Finally, Bernard pulled out all the numbers he had calculated. Step by step, he proved to George that no matter how you looked at it, this was a guaranteed winning investment. George sat there speechless. He realized Bernard wasn't some dreamer. He was a careful, rational strategist, and partnering with someone like that was the right move. But there was still one major problem. Because they were black, if they approached the owner directly, they would be rejected immediately. So they needed a white man they could trust to represent them, and Bernard already had the perfect candidate in mind. It was Matt, the contractor who had recently remodeled his house. Even though Matt was just an ordinary construction worker, he had big ambitions. Most importantly, he didn't discriminate against black people, but the moment he heard their plan, Matt was completely lost.
I don't know anything about banking. I don't know how to buy a bank.
We're not actually buying a bank. We're buying a building that the banks are in. The banks are tenants.
Right.
You just be the face of our partnership.
Starting the next day, Bernard and George began training Matt full-time. They didn't just teach him finance, negotiation skills, and business strategy. They personally coached him on how to present himself. From golfing to fine dining etiquette, they polished every aspect of him. After 3 months of preparation, Matt didn't let them down. He still couldn't fully understand all the complicated financial concepts, but he had strengths of his own. His memory was extraordinary. Whenever he couldn't understand complicated terminology or formulas, he just drilled them into his memory. Combined with the natural talent he showed on the golf course, no one would ever guess that this elegant young man had once been nothing more than a regular construction worker. After that, they built the perfect identity for him, a young oil millionaire from Texas who had inherited a massive fortune. The cover story was airtight and completely believable, and when they finally got close to the building owner, Matt immediately impressed everyone. With one beautiful golf swing, he completely changed the owner's opinion of him and successfully secured a meeting.
I was looking for a good game. See if I can find someone to give me one. Charles Renault, good to meet you.
But deep down, Matt had no confidence in his negotiating skills. Bernard, however, already had everything under control. He had calculated every possible number ahead of time and forced Matt to memorize them perfectly. So no matter how high the owner tried to raise the price during negotiations, Matt could instantly respond. With precise numbers down to the decimal point, the owner was shocked. Even the professional accountants sitting nearby were impressed. In the end, the building that was originally listed at $4 million was purchased for just $56 million. After successfully buying the property, Bernard quickly realized why the building had never made money before. The problem was simple. It couldn't fill its offices. The luxury building sat in a prime location, but the previous owner only wanted to rent to prestigious white-owned corporations, and those large companies usually already had headquarters of their own, so demand was limited. Bernard immediately saw the opportunity. He shifted his focus towards successful African-American professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants. These people desperately needed office space. They wanted prestigious office space to strengthen their professional image and earn clients' trust. With that one move alone, Bernard quickly solved the vacancy problem and created stable rental income. But his ambitions went far beyond that. Using the building as the center of everything, he started building a complete business ecosystem. Banks, law firms, and medical consulting services, all connected together, sharing clients and resources. And as that system began operating smoothly, the value of the building skyrocketed. From that point on, the partnership between the 3 men only grew stronger. Bernard's real estate empire expanded rapidly. At its peak, he owned 177 properties communities. He not only broke racial barriers in Los Angeles, but also helped integrate communities, allowing black families to move into white neighborhoods. His achievements even earned him a meeting with the vice president. But even all that success still wasn't enough for Bernard. He returned to his hometown in Texas with both wealth and ambition, determined to challenge the deeply rooted racism there. But the moment he stepped onto that familiar land, reality hit him like a punch to the gut. Nothing had changed. African Americans were still discriminated against in every industry. They were shut out of white-controlled business circles and denied loans by white-owned banks. Even the black shoeshine boys outside the banks only served white customers. Seeing that scene, Bernard was deeply shaken. And once again, a crazy idea entered his mind, because Bernard himself had once been just a shoeshine boy, but ever since he was young, he had been fascinated by finance. He intentionally set up his shoeshine stand outside banks, so his customers would all be wealthy businessmen. Sometimes, he would polish their shoes extra slowly on purpose, just to overhear their conversations about money and business. After each customer left, he would quickly write down everything he had heard, and to him, that information was priceless knowledge. Little by little, Bernard began dreaming of becoming a banker himself, but his father worried constantly about him. He told Bernard that dream could never come true, because this was Texas in 1939, and black people weren't allowed to own businesses.
He's born the wrong color, son. Negro man can't earn money with this, white man won't let him no matter how good at it you are.
Maybe not in Texas.
You really think it's gonna be so different for you? You go somewhere else.
Even after hearing those words, Bernard's eyes still burned with determination. 15 years later, he arrived in Los Angeles with his wife, chasing the American dream, even though they could only live in a tiny storage room inside a relative's house. Racial discrimination here was slightly less severe. Bernard decided to start his business here. With his sharp instincts for opportunity, he quickly noticed something interesting. Vacancy rates in white neighborhoods were high, while black neighborhoods were overcrowded. So he decided to start in real estate. He focused on buying homes in white neighborhoods and renting them to middle-class black families. Before long, he found an apartment building right next to a black community. The building looked old and rundown. Weeds covered the property, but its location was perfect. When Bernard met with the owner to negotiate, the man asked for $35,000, but Bernard only had $30,000 in savings, so he proposed paying a down payment first and covering the rest after the units were rented out.
Well, I admire your entrepreneurial gusto, but it's not the way I do business. I'm sorry.
As expected, he was rejected again. Nobody wanted to lend money to a black man. Just as Bernard was about to leave, he noticed a calendar on the owner's desk. It had been gifted by a bank manager. Suddenly, an idea hit him. He immediately went to the bank listed on the calendar. But the moment he reached the front desk, he was treated with discrimination. With no other choice, Bernard waited outside the bank for hours, until the manager finally got off work. Bernard approached him and falsely claimed that the property owner had sent him. He asked for a $5,000 loan to complete the purchase. But in the end, he was still rejected. Just as Bernard stood there disappointed, the owner suddenly called the bank. Surprisingly, the owner wasn't angry that Bernard had used his name. Instead, he was impressed by Bernard's courage and intelligence. In the end, the owner not only agreed to sell him the apartment building, but even offered to become his loan guarantor.
Why are you doing this, Mr. Barker?
Because normal business customs are in place to screw people like you, Mr. Garrett. You went to see Reed knowing the deck was stacked because you have that much confidence in this deal.
At last, Bernard finally bought the first property of his life. But when he prepared to start renovating the building, an elderly tenant immediately protested. She told Bernard to inform the landlord that no matter how nice the renovations were, she would never agree to higher rent. When Bernard calmly explained that he was the new owner, the old woman exploded with anger.
Don't you sass me, boy. This is a white building. You can't own this place.
After yelling at him, she stormed back into her apartment. But not long afterward, the police suddenly arrived. The old woman had reported that a black man was pretending to be the landlord. Fortunately, Bernard had already prepared for this. Calmly, he pulled out the purchase contract he carried with him at all times. Even after checking the documents again and again, the officers still couldn't believe that this black man had actually bought the building. But in the end, there was nothing they could do. They had no choice but to leave. That night, when Bernard returned to the apartment building, he found the old woman waiting outside the entrance. She tried to stop him from going inside, but Bernard simply smiled and told her that he was the new owner and would be living there from now on. The old woman stood there stunned. The very next day, she packed her bags and moved out, saying she could never live in the same building as a black man. But almost immediately after she left, a black woman moved in as a new tenant. Just as Bernard expected, the demand for housing was enormous. It didn't take long for him to pay off the remaining balance to the white owner. The owner was deeply impressed by Bernard's abilities. Right there on the spot, he proposed a partnership that would benefit them both. The two of them would run the rental business together. The white owner would handle the contracts publicly, while Bernard operated behind the scenes. That way, they could avoid the barriers caused by racism, since it was rare for Bernard to meet a white man who truly respected him. He gladly accepted the partnership. From that point on, the two worked side by side, and the business grew bigger and bigger. Before long, they were making enormous profits. What made Bernard happiest was finally fulfilling the promise he had made to his wife. At last, they moved out of the tiny storage room and into the beautiful mansion they had always dreamed of. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Just when Bernard thought his life had finally turned around, terrible news arrived. The owner he had partnered with died from illness, and overnight, control of the company fell into the hands of the man's widow. Unlike her husband, this woman was deeply racist. Not only did she want to throw Bernard out of the mansion he had worked so hard for, she also wanted to buy out his shares at an extremely low price. Faced with such unreasonable demands, Bernard refused to back down, but the woman remained aggressive and arrogant. She warned him that if he refused her offer, he could fight her in court instead.
I will up my offer to 25 cents on the dollar. And if you see fit to refuse that, Mr. Garrett, you can walk away with nothing.
At that moment, Bernard's lawyer poured cold water on his hopes. A black man had almost no chance of winning against a white person in court. And on top of that, Bernard had always stayed behind the scenes, which meant he had no proof that he was truly a partner. But Bernard refused to surrender. He immediately thought of the bank manager from before. Unfortunately, the manager had already been hired away by the widow with a massive salary and was now serving as her financial advisor. He refused to even meet Bernard. But sometimes, hope appears when you least expect it. As Bernard stood alone in the bank lobby, feeling completely defeated, he noticed that the building housed 7 different banks. In that instant, an idea flashed through his mind. He decided he would buy the entire building. That way, the banks would never be able to reject him again. Years later, Bernard finally returned home in glory. His father was shocked and overjoyed to see how successful his son had become. But even then, he still tried to warn Bernard. He begged him not to do business there, because the racism rooted in Texas was far too deep for one man to change. But Bernard's eyes remained as determined as ever. He walked back to the bank, where he once shined shoes as a boy. Looking at the young shoeshine boy standing outside, he saw his younger self all over again. Right then and there, Bernard made a decision. He would buy this bank. He was determined to change the racial prejudice in his hometown, because in the world of business, whoever controls the banks controls the lifeblood of the economy. To Bernard, Continental Bank was not just a bank, it was a weapon, a way to change the fate of an entire community. But when George heard Bernard's plan, he strongly opposed it. Then he revealed a shocking secret, and that secret would change Bernard's